Welcome to the Journalism Innovation Podcast, where we bring you the most interesting perspectives and insights from media entrepreneurs and publishers at the heart of news innovation in Europe. I'm your host, Tara Kelly, and in this episode of the Journalism Innovation Podcast, we discuss how multilingual journalism can enrich your storytelling and your news organization. We sat down with Alessia Cerantola, Editorial Director at Investigate Europe, and Thomas Seymat, Head of Innovation and Digital for News at ARTE. The pair discussed how independent news organizations can scale beyond language barriers, attract new audiences, and localize content to fit cultures across Europe. This podcast is part of the European Journalism Center's Journalism Innovation Network, a newly launched initiative for media entrepreneurs and news innovators looking for a space to connect, learn, and thrive. To join, head over to ejc.net/network. This podcast and network has been made possible with the support of the Google News Initiative. Now let's take a listen to our conversation with Thomas Seymat and Alessia Cerantola. Alessia and Thomas, welcome to the Journalism Innovation Podcast.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for both of you joining us today. So we're going to be discussing how independent news organizations sort of scale and go beyond language barriers and attract new audiences and localize and adapt that content for different cultures across the continent. And I just thought we could start with Thomas. I know you've been at Euronews for the past decade. You've had lots of different roles, but now you have a new role at ARTE, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. And so I wonder, Thomas, if we could start with you and you could sort of talk about how, language has kind of changed over the years with your role at Euronews and sort of how you see things going forward with ARTE.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, first of all, for hosting us. The role I had with Euronews was in a company with 12 languages, and right now I'm in a new media company, ARTE, with historically 2 languages, French and German, and adding new European languages recently. I think for both of those companies, the interest beyond the experimentation of it, or beyond the what a few decades ago was new, the interest can be very strategic, right? And I think something we're going to talk about more, but what language do you add to your offer that goes beyond just what is nice to have? There is business things to take into consideration, political aspect, and obviously the media landscape has evolved as well around the past 30 years, because it made sense for a long time to have one media doing several languages, because in some countries you didn't have a 24/7 news channel, so you would really feel a gap. Today, this is less so the case, but that doesn't mean multilingual channels or media are bound to disappear. Quite the contrary, I think.
And over the years at Euronews, I mean, did it expand from different languages up to 12, or when you began, were there less languages there?
So when Euronews was created back in 1992, 93, there was 6 languages, and it grew. Then some languages left, more were created. I joined back in 2012 when the Greek service was being built, and it's not an overnight thing, right? Obviously, there are deals before to add new languages, but you need to prepare your backend in the language, meaning, for instance, all the tags in your CMS needs to be in these new languages. And when you're a news channel, you have hundreds of tags, so you need dedicated people to work on this.
Absolutely. And Alessia, at Investigate Europe, you're the editorial director, and you've had other roles as well. For instance, you were at OCCRP, where you wrote a really interesting Medium article about Anglo-Saxon journalism, and you begin the piece by talking about your anxiety for writing in English, and how we're sort of sanitizing journalism through maybe this inverted pyramid that the U.S. markets tend to go with when it comes to writing articles. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that for us.
Yes, I started as a translator from Japanese, translating Japanese media, and then I became a reporter. And so I started writing in Italian, but also in English. And that's where I started realizing the differences in the journalisms in different cultures. So it's not just about a language, right? It's also about a culture. But it was not until I joined OCCRP and I became a coordinating editor that I realized how different are also the people are struggling the same way from different cultures, from different countries. And so I was in the kitchen, right, of the OCCRP, with the editors, and I saw these two parts, right? The reporters from around the world writing in their own languages on one side, and the editors, mostly native English speakers, they were trying to process the material that was coming and to turn it into something that was the closest to what I call the Anglo-Saxon style, which is very formalized from my perspective, is because they are, there's always a lead, a nut graph. So it's way more rigid, if you want to use this word, compared to many other journalism cultures. And so all these nuances and this way of writing from different cultures were all turned into something, a product that was good for the English readers. And so this is when I realized how important it is also, maintaining differences, the nuances of the original language. And I start wondering, what are the compromises that reporters from their own languages are coping with when their pieces are turning into English?
Absolutely. And I wonder if both of you could talk a little bit about your experience and what challenges you've come across in multilingual newsrooms. Like, what are the different things that maybe newsroom managers face when navigating this, and culturally, as well as trying to localize stories or make it relevant for that audience? Thomas, do you want to start?
Sure. I think in my experience at two different newsrooms now, I can see that it's as much a bonus, a wealth, right, of having different languages, because it brings different perspective, a variety of sources that you don't have if you're a monolingual newsroom. But obviously, this comes with a lot of obstacles of duplicating or adding even more channels of communication, of publication to your workflow. Luckily, now you have tools to monitor and automate some of that process, especially, for instance, on social media. And obviously, right now we are in this new AI age, and it is making things easier, especially with automated translation. But it shouldn't be relied upon 100%. Obviously, I need to state it very clearly that none of the newsrooms I work with solely rely on automated translation. But it can make things a lot easier, especially, sometimes in discussing with, teammates where you don't have necessarily a language of a work language in common. And in general, I would say it's the pros outweigh the cons in my mind, and this is also why I've chose to stay in this kind of work environment.
Absolutely. And Alessia, I know Investigate Europe publishes in numerous languages, and you have newsletters in various languages. And I wonder, what's your experience? What are the challenges that you're seeing as director at this organization?
Yes, for sure. Writing in different languages is not just about, the wordings. It's also about the structure. It's conveying a specific message for a community. So this is more, it's beyond just the language skills. So I think the challenge is, every community has created a journalism practice according to its local culture. So it's not just about translating in terms of, literal translation. So that's why, for sure, some technologies can help with that, but you still need, for now at least, journalists who can help in turning this message into something that is relevant for that specific community. And so for us, we are covering 12 European countries, and it means that each one journalist has his own way of approaching a specific topic because they are aware of what is the debate, for example, that is around that topic in their own country, which is very relevant because they have to, the lead of the piece will be basically mirroring the priority of, what is more relevant for the country. And then for sure, there's what also Thomas has just mentioned, the fact that most of us are not native English speakers. So when we speak in the newsroom all together in our virtual newsroom, there's sometimes loss in translation, there's some misunderstandings. And so English is something that is taking us all together, but at the same time, there's a risk sometimes of losing, the nuances of the original language. That is a constant, daily effort that we are trying to do to, come up with the best also messages that are shared by everyone and that everyone are also comfortable with. And this is challenging, but it's also exciting, because it's something that is making us improving also as a team.
I wonder what this means for news organizations, financially speaking, when they're moving into these new markets and expanding into new languages. Like, what are some of the benefits and constraints both of you kind of come across in your different roles? Thomas, do you want to talk a bit about Euronews?
Sure. So Euronews being a private company, at least now, it used to be more publicly owned before. The expansion to new languages is also seen as expansion to new markets, but it's also the other way around. The focus is sometimes on new markets or new investors to, for instance, add new languages, or more recently, a model that Euronews has adopted and will, I'm sure, push to more in the future, even though I'm not there anymore, is the affiliate model, where they find local, and by local I mean national, I don't mean smaller than the national partners in the countries, who either are telco, public bodies, investors in general, or existing media, to spin off a localized and local version of your output on an affiliate model in the country. And Euronews has been very successful building Euronews Serbia, Albania, Georgia, Romania, and Bulgaria. And there is a lot of editorial exchanges, but they are their own separate newsrooms and their own separate skills and approach to news as well. So it's a richer work environment eventually.
And Alessia, do you want to talk about, what this means for Investigate Europe, like, publishing in all these different languages and maybe thinking about expanding it to other European languages?
I think for now we're good with what we have. Is already very challenging, 12 countries with 12 different languages is already something that is creating a lot of work internally, because it's not just about reporting and then writing, but it's also about social media, and there's all sort of, the process is quite extended to the point of, there's a lot of work behind that is needed to be done by the reporters themselves, but also by the rest of the team. So adding more languages is, of course, is ideal. It's a dream, but first you have to, strengthen the structure of the organization. There's many challenges for sure, and these are due to the fact of the resources, time constraint, and accuracy, because whenever you are ready to publish something on a different language, you need to fact check it again. And it's not just about the text, but also the text for the social media. You need to have constantly update with all the latest information that are coming from the rest of the team. So everyone has to be informed until the last social media post that you are putting out. So this is requiring a lot of time, and in some ways technology can help, and we are exploring ways of using artificial intelligence for making some of these segments of this process faster. for example, in creating threads automatically. This is something that can be originally be done by artificial intelligence. Of course, you still need to be reviewed and still need a journalistic eye and review, but at the same time, this can get us a bit faster into these segments. But yes, it's quite challenging thinking about new languages, although, again, it's a dream. Why not?
And I think bilingualism is something that I came across when I was at the Huffington Post. The Spanish editors were talking about how there were a lot of people within the United States who were bilingual and speaking, and reading in both languages and wanting to get their news in both languages and kind of using them interchangeably. And I wonder, has that ever been something that you've come across, either of you, in your different roles, either at Investigate Europe or Euronews or ARTE, where that's kind of played into and sort of strategized by top management and seen as like a way to kind of attract new audiences that are, a little bit different than what you imagine?
Thinking about bilingualism or linguistic minorities in country can be a bit tricky in terms of business model, I would say. And I think I can't think of a very successful pure for-profit newsroom that's making it in that space. However, outside of niche, mainstream newsrooms, spinning off a minority language newsroom for revenues, right? I can't think about a single successful model. However, for niche or for public broadcasters, it's a different approach, right? Not that there is no ROI needed, but the strategic and the sociological objectives of representing your body politics truly and informing your citizen, no matter what language they speak, is key. You look at the public broadcasters in Switzerland, for instance, they have 4+ outputs in the 4 languages. In their output. Highly diverse countries like Australia and Canada have tens of languages on their outputs. So it becomes something more than just addressing a market and then creating revenue. So it's becoming like informing your citizens, right?
And Alessia, I imagine much of your newsroom is probably fluent in English, and then they work in another language, right? So they're automatically, you've got a team that is bilingual. So maybe you're dealing with those kind of challenges or not. I don't know.
Yeah, partly, right? That's what I was mentioning before, that it's something that is creating, of course, by default, you have to be bilingual also because you have to communicate. It's the other way around, right? You have to communicate with the rest of the team, which is the body that is the hub coordinating everything. At the same time, yes, being native speakers in their own local language is what is our strength also, right? Is what makes us also the having the power of having a larger audience for sure. So it's kind of the nature of IE in that sense, being bilingual or having reporters who can do that. It's in that sense is our strategy for sure. But
most of the colleagues I worked with along the year, like Alessia, they're all bilingual, and I started as a bilingual journalist in the newsroom of Euronews many decades ago, at least 12 years ago, and today at ARTE I am blown away by the level of mastery of French for some of my German colleagues and vice versa. And it's very humbling because I speak a little bit of German, but I need to catch up. But I think being a multilingual journalist also brings soft skills, and they're not soft in any sense of this term, but mental plasticity that's very useful in terms of, thinking of a problem from different angles, finding sources, etc. It's such a big plus.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
You're becoming a bridge, basically. So you're constantly a bridge between two cultures, which is exactly also what is usually strengthening also your reporting. It can be because you're always, between two parts, and you're always thinking, how can I convey this message in a way that is understandable for both sides? So it's a very good exercise. I have to say the same reason why I love so much since the beginning dealing with Japan, because it's so different from Italy, from the country I come from. So it was a constant daily exercise for myself in trying to understand why are they doing these things in this way, and how can I convey this? It's not just about language. How can I convey this culture in an article, for example, or in a radio or a video piece? This is something that is enriching the reporter all the time.
I think that's especially true with Japanese because there's limited tenses, right? And so you really have to be specific, it feels like, when you're speaking in Japanese, because you don't have all the conditional tenses that you have in French or English. At least that from my brief time of studying Japanese, that was what I learned.
Think about also, it doesn't have to be the difference between Japanese and Italian, but about like English and Italian or other Romance languages, because just the fact that we have female and male, and in the pronouns, and every time I have a conversation also with friends that are speaking in English, sometimes I have to come back and say, are you speaking is she or he? While referring to general conversation about friends. And so you always had to add a line, basically, and journalistically can translate into one more line. It can be for a video, for a radio, so it's practical consequences, right? So it's fascinating.
Yeah, absolutely, Alessia. And one of the things you could use to make it easier to streamline multilingual production is templating, right? Same video or the same social media post, and you just duplicate. But that doesn't always work, because sometimes you write in English and it takes 25% less words to say the same thing as in French. But then if you add German, it takes 30% more words than in French. And so your time codes for your subtitles or the template for your social media posts can't fit the text, or the other way around, there's not enough text. Visually speaking, there's no one size fits all tool.
And I'm sure maybe when you were at Euronews working in Farsi, and I'm not sure if you guys do Arabic as well, but yeah, like the right to left kind of conundrum of designing a CMS that can deal with that, and also thinking about, okay, what should we translate? Do we translate everything? Does this make does it make financial sense? But also, what's our purpose? What's our mission? And how do you find that balance?
Yeah, to go back to the right to left, left to right, it's an issue internally, although our CMS was still built in-house, so really to accommodate this. The worst part was with third-party platforms or SaaS solution we were looking for, and they don't know. They've never had a client in Arabic or Farsi, and they can't accommodate this specific segment. But for us, it was a very active online, so we had to, at least we should, pay very close attention to their needs.
Do you translate or localize everything? I imagine, Alessia, that is the case in Investigate Europe.
Well, for us, but it's also an issue, right? Because every time we have a story, we have to decide if we want to translate in how many languages for our websites, because it's multilingual website. So that translates into resources, right? Time, because people need time to translate those, or we have sometimes the help of translators, professional translators, but that's a cost, right? So it's a decision that we have to take every time. But this is also the raison d'être of our organization, right? That are trying to communicate in different languages. But every time there's also an editorial decision from from each part, and say, do we need to translate this article also in this specific language? Is it going to add some value? What is it worth it? So this is important. These are important decisions that we take every time. So yes, it's important.
It's a constant discussion as well in the places I've been to or worked at. And I saw both extreme ends of the spectrum. We do everything the same way, adapted in the national languages, or there is a common core and you do bits and bobs of what you want, or you're more free to do. And I'm going to be very transparent. I don't think they break the the code, or they break the found perfect solution. Both answer spectrum, but pretty much you'll have pros and cons for all the solutions. And but every time you, like Alessia said, it's an editorial decision, and I would even add it's a strategic decision because it's about resource allocation as well.
Yeah. And I wonder, is automation and AI and machine learning, are those tools, are there any tools out there that you're seeing that could make things a little bit easier? Maybe we can't completely rely on them and we do need professional translators, but how can we speed things up and make it more, accessible, but not kill ourselves with the perfect localization, so to speak?
Yeah, so this is something that, for example, we are exploring and trying to understand if there are some tools that we can use safely, by the way, because there's also a concern, right? Being investigative pieces, there's an issue of putting everything out there in, on artificial intelligence tools that are just basically taking our data. So that's important that whatever we put out also for translation has to be already fact checked and accurate. Otherwise we are spreading false information in a way, in a big scale, if you think about it. But for sure, once we manage to, come to a conclusion, a good idea about at what point we use these tools, this can really get us faster into translation. That for sure will need still a lot of reviews. The journalistic role is still there. As I was mentioning before, we are considering also the use of artificial intelligence for social media, so creating posts that again needs to be checked by journalists, and they need a lot of still journalistic work and also editorial review. But they can get some processes getting faster.
In terms of translation, one key player has really emerged with its quality, and it's been used at different news organizations, including Le Monde in English, and it's DeepL. It's also something our news has been looking at. And like Alessia said, you still need review. So the productivity gains, to speak like a manager, isn't exactly evident, although it is faster in general, but you need to be extremely careful with the quality. For social media, something like a tool that would help you automate some of the publishing, you plug your RSS feed in, and you don't have to log into 12 different X accounts, 12 different YouTube accounts, 12 different Facebook accounts. That makes a lot of sense, and you can have overview from one single seat on all of that, but the material needs to be there, i.e. the text, the post, and sometimes even the picture are ready-made, but you can automate and centralize the coordination of social media more easily so than translation.
Yeah. I've even been using it for this podcast to sort of help find the clips that I want, but I still find it like I still want to do things the old school way, but I'm trying to adapt and see, okay, what does work? Are they able to find a good clip that I couldn't find by listening to it again for another hour? But still, yeah, it can help speed things up, but you still want to keep your eye on the ball.
Yeah, female and male, but gender, of course, the numbers, but also the way they express certain feelings, for example, is completely different. I had to say that I started as a manga translator. That was one of the hardest tasks I'd ever had in my life. I was just graduated Japanese, so it was a nice gig at the beginning of my career. So it was like, for example, some of the emotions are not expressed on a sentence, but they are put, for example, on the face or part of the body of the person. So you have then to translate it into your language, and which we don't used to do that. It's not how we communicate, for example, in Italian, but also most of the Western languages. But again, fascinating, and makes you think a lot about who you are and how your culture, your language, your country is expressing its culture through your own language.
And I think certain studies have shown that, people have different personalities in different languages. Like, I remember I went to Sweden with a good friend of mine, and I noticed his personality completely changed when he moved into Swedish versus English. It's just interesting to see how people have that. And I wonder, has that ever been something you've come across, Alessia, that when people are writing and you're dealing with these different audiences and you need to think, right? It's not just about word for word translation. It's like localizing it culturally for this audience. And also working with a newsroom that has different personalities in different languages, right? I'm sure that you came across that as well, Thomas, at Euronews and probably in your new job at ARTE.
I'm gonna say that at least making a charter, a digital charter, or a style guide is hard in one language. Try in 12. It becomes extremely challenging, I would say, to set up and to have it enforced, of course. So it's most definitely adding a lot of spice. If you understand the languages, you can see the difference in the people for sure.
Yeah. I mean, it's hard to think about, a piece, an article, as a monolithic piece. We always have to geolocalize it and try to convey all the nuances that will help us in communicating with that specific community. And this is the big challenge, but it's also, what can enrich the pieces. And it starts again from the communication we are having virtually on a weekly or daily basis with the newsroom, because, as you start the conversation, sometimes when I'm speaking with English, in Anglo-Saxon context, usually we tend to start our meetings in a straightforward way. So we jump into the call with our agenda items and straight there, and it's quite efficient, I have to say. But at the same time, if you're dealing with different cultures, I speak also as an Italian, but no, I mean, I think it belongs to many other cultures. You have to introduce the conversation even online with some jokes or with speaking and talking about your family or something else to warm up the situation and having a better result in these conversations with people that are coming from other cultures. And otherwise you will not get there. You don't touch their ground zero. You don't touch their heart and their souls if you're not speaking on and trying to create this frame for conversation. And it's the same for the articles. For the written articles for TV or radio is basically mirroring these dynamics.
And to add to what Alessia is saying in terms of intercultural communication, and we are also at the disadvantage when we interact with someone who's a native English speaker. And this is something that I think needs to be addressed. Like, it's hard to, especially if they're your manager, it's hard sometimes to understand whether they're joking or not. If they make a remark off the cuff, you can't defend yourself, or it's harder to argue is better probably. If you don't have the right vocabulary, if you feel a bit ill at ease in speaking a different language. So to the discussion on the pros of the good things about international and multilingual news organization, being extra careful in terms of inclusion, linguistic inclusion, meaning as well, doubling the effort in terms of, it's not non-aggressive communication, but it's everybody should be on the same playing field, is my point.
And I just wonder if perhaps either of you could share maybe an example of a successful story that kind of had a real impact because it was a multilingual piece of journalism. And you were able to sort of tell a story maybe that other news outlets weren't able to, for these different local audiences. By local, I mean in country.
It's not so much a story per se, and I'm gonna patting myself in the back a little bit if you allow me. Back in 2016, I led the initiative at Euronews to do 360 video, this immersive kind of look in the video kind of experience, similar to VR, except it's actual video file. And because we had the facility to produce them in multiple languages, we were among the first, if not the first, to produce this kind of content for news in Greek, in Hungarian, possibly in Farsi and other languages where there was not locally, in countries or the area, the resources, the desire, the equipment, even maybe to do that sort of thing.
And Alessia, I wonder if there, I mean, you're doing so many different cross-border investigations, right? And Investigate Europe. So I'm sure all the big investigations, you're probably thinking, how does this affect all these different audiences? But I wonder if there's one that stands out that kind of was cross-border and multilingual in a way that maybe other competitors couldn't do that.
Yeah, I have to say, I have to refer to a previous experience I had before joining Investigate Europe, because I joined the end of last year. I have to say that it's a story that we are particularly proud of. I worked on with the ARTE, which is the investigative center of Italy that helped co-funding back in 2011. We've been working on a story about a former Italian police officer who was opening his house to young women travelers. They were visiting Venice, so it's very close to where I am from. And he was hosting them using couch surfing. And some of them suffered at his hands, and he was abusing and also sexually harassing and abusing them. The story was... So it was starting in Italy, but these travelers were from all over the world. So we use the power of the network and of the different languages for reporting the stories of these women from all over the world, from Asia to Canada, United States, passing through, of course, Europe. And the power of having local newspapers collaborating with us in this network and collaboration that we run, it was very powerful, because we managed to expose a local case of a serial rapist throughout all these media. The story came out in 2015 with the major publications from The Guardian, Newsweek, Sydney Morning Herald, or CBC. And then it became also a podcast, verified, and then last year became a Sky TV series. So, but it all started from here, but we use the power of the network and multi-languages to reach out to an international audience about an individual case that had, repercussions for the lives of so many women. So this was an example of how you can work on this level, right? And the importance also of communicating something like a rape in different cultures. It's not just about linguistic. It's very important to add the context and to communicate using the right words and the right information for a specific culture. Because, in some countries in Asia, the topic is bit of a taboo, so it's hard to transfer this information and writing about it. So it's important to have work also with local journalists who can help you in trying to shape and make the best out of the material you have for the goal of reporting about such a topic. So this is an example that I'm particularly proud of. And it made me understand the importance, again, of languages and cultures and the network.
And also, like, building trust and credibility through, all these different, with connecting with all these different cultures, but also ethically thinking about how this is going to be interpreted or how you handle such sensitive stories. And yeah, absolutely. Well, listen, we're coming to an end here. So it would just be really great to hear from both of you, like, if you could share one piece of advice for other newsrooms in Europe, maybe people who are thinking about starting up a multilingual news outlet or are thinking of expanding into other languages, like what's one or two pieces of advice you have for those in Europe who are looking to sort of maybe do what Investigate Europe has done or ARTE is now doing?
I would say look beyond the numbers. Especially the financial numbers, even though obviously it's super important to take into consideration. But and my point is exactly what Alessia was saying, is having other linguistic output multiply your reach, obviously, but also the impact of what you do. And you can't really put a price on this. You need to pay your resources. You need to pay a journalist and invest resources. But if it makes sense strategically for your media organization to expand your reach and your impact through another language, I think you should give it a try. And that can go through, affiliation, syndication, partnerships. You don't need to build something from scratch. There are now many models and tools to help you do that.
I think you can exactly use the power of a network for trying to have more languages, because this enrich the entire organization or the newsroom. And the key thing to me is always being is to be very respectful, because each language is an expression of a culture. So it's not just about translating, it's something that goes beyond that. So what was also parachute journalism in the past, and is still happening, it has its limits. So choosing the right people for translating and conveying these messages, adding the right context, which is very important to every time you are, writing about a story in a language, it has to be conveyed and, reported to another language. The context is essential. And so context, being respectful, and trying to hire the right people for that.
Brilliant. Well, thank you both, Alessia and Thomas, for coming on the Journalism Innovation Podcast. It was really interesting hearing your perspectives across Europe and, hearing all the different experience you've had with languages in the media. So thank you both.
Thanks you.
Thank you. Merci beaucoup.
A big thanks to all of our listeners for tuning in today. Want to hear more interesting perspectives on news innovation and media entrepreneurship? You can head over to our free Journalism Innovation Network at ejc.net/network. This initiative and podcast are powered by the European Journalism Center and supported by the Google News Initiative. I've been your host, Tara Kelly, and that's all for now. See you next time.